Welcome to Maternal. My name is Kenya Gibson, and I'm here with my co-host. Hi, Jay.
Hello. Good afternoon or morning or whatever time you're listening to this.
Yes.
I got to figure out a saying.
No, it's all good. It's all good. So we're joined by two lovely ladies today who are in the studio with us. We're going to be talking about access to alternative maternal health care beyond traditional hospitals. We're going to be talking about the differences and options between OBGYNs, such as doulas and birthing centers, and a whole lot of other things in between. But I want to introduce these ladies to the platform. Hello, Denisha.
Hi, hello.
So
good day.
Yes, good day, good day.
Time of the day.
So give us a little background on you and kind of how we connected. So you reached out to me on social media.
Yeah.
You had a wonderful story that was told about you on CBS,
Yeah.
and I was like, we have to have her on the Maternal
Yeah.
podcast. So tell us a
Let's
little bit about
follow.
that story and just why you reached out.
Yeah, so I love your page. I follow, everything you're doing.
Thank
and
you.
Found out about Maternal, and I'm really big on that advocacy also, like in my story posts. Sometimes I can sound a little preachy, but I want to get the word out there. I am Denisha. By background, I'm a counselor. I'm a mental health clinician, both licensed in school and mental health counseling.
Nice.
So I focus on a lot of course, mental health wellness, but also just whole mind, physical, spiritual wellness. So even in the aspect of maternal health, I'm big on that because it's in the area of wellness. I do have a company called Convo, in which I host life and relationship wellness services
I peeped it.
for
I seen
couples
your Instagram.
and singles. Yes,
Yes.
both and teens too.
Nice,
Yeah.
nice. So tell us a little bit about your maternal health experience and why you felt led to use a birthing center.
Okay. Yeah. So I have 3 children.
Okay.
They are 16, 7, and now a 13-month-old.
Wow.
Yeah. So 3, like the gap is insane of even my growth from the 16-year-old until now. I've learned so much. I was telling Latoya outside, like the things I know now, I wish I knew with my 16-year-old, from nutrition to parenting, like any aspect of it. I'm just so happy I learned, better now than never. So the reason I have become so like serious and headstrong, of course you all know like the rates of what's going on with Black women and Black maternal health from prenatal to postnatal.
Right.
And we become more and more aware of it, especially with social media and seeing those rates and percentages. But I got a lot more serious when it came to my 3rd child because I felt like I just didn't have enough access and knowledge with the first 2 on what to do. I had like a little bit of like, self-guidance and self-direction and maybe some things I hear from my elders. Doula, I knew about doulas, but I didn't see like what the need was. I didn't see the benefit the first 2 times. I'm just like, oh, an extra person like my grandmother. Like I have her, but then when
Right.
she wasn't around, I understood why I knew that I needed a doula now. But my first 2 experiences, when I looked back in the moment, I didn't realize how difficult and normalized some of the things I went through with my first 2 experiences were until I gained more education around Black maternal health, until I started to know people close to me who had experienced, complications, deaths, from mothers to the actual babies. And I'm like, whoa, now I'm scared,
Yeah.
so I'm like, now I start digging, doing my research, and, I get pregnant now, and it's during the pandemic, so even more fear is around that. And I'm like, no, I need to start learning something. I need to put myself in a better position to be healthier, to be, more knowledgeable. And when I started to read and gain more knowledge around what was going on, I'm like, wait a minute, that happened to me
Right.
in the first birth. This happened to me in the second birth. And I'm like, you mean to tell me that should not have taken place? And I didn't even know to say anything
Right.
or, to look for different alternative care. So now I'm opening like my brain up, and I'm like, no, we're not going to do this a 3rd time. I'm going to figure out something different to do. And that's when I decided, I'm like, I'm not going to do the hospital.
Good for you.
Yeah, I'm like, that was the one thing I knew I didn't want to do was the hospital.
I'm very excited to hear you say that because typically you'll see, well, if that happened the first time and the second time, this is just what it is,
Yeah.
right? But you wanted to figure out something different and you actually sought the knowledge. So good for you.
Thank you.
For taking that time and really devoting yourself to having a better outcome from within, right?
Thank
So
you.
how did that come about? Like what were some things that you found in your research that was so stark?
First of all, the first thing I thought about with my first daughter, just the timeline of from when my water broke to just getting me cared for, and the things that took place in that timeline. I'm like, whoa, hold on. One of the things was that my water had, once your water breaks, like, that's it. Like, you can have your pain and complain, but once the water breaks, you have to be careful because then you start to leak. I was like in the hallway. I wasn't given a room. I was laid out on the floor in the hallway, and it was just, and then like just not having anyone. I didn't have a nurse. I had to like scream and call for nurses. So when I was reading and I'm thinking about that, and I'm like, wait a minute, like, there was no one, no one there taking care of me, and I'm complaining, and they're not taking me serious, and they're just like, I remember one of the nurses saying, like, welcome to motherhood, because it was my first child.
Wow.
I do remember that, like, when I'm screaming, and I'm like, now I'm thinking back to, I'm like, I was totally being neglected.
Yeah.
Like, fully neglected, and I was young. I was 22.
Yeah.
So I'm like, that definitely played a role. It's like, just another young black girl.
And you had nothing to compare it to.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right, first time. Exactly. Nothing, and, no other hospital experience. So, and being that young, it's not like many of my friends or family were having children either. But that alone, and again, the things that transpired during the delivery, and I just thought, and I'm like, my first daughter I also had naturally. I'm like, I have big fear of needles, so that was like my first. I was like, I don't want that big needle that they told me about. But so I didn't go, but I didn't have any care in that process of that new pain, and it's just, I knew I was afraid of needles, but there was no, well, here's some comfort and here's what you can do. It was just like so much neglect once I learned, what should be happening. And then by my second daughter, I knew not to go to that hospital. So I went to a different hospital, assuming because of the area and the reputation, okay, I'm gonna have a little bit better of an experience, which I kind of did. This time I wasn't on the hallway floor. I was in a chair instead and waiting from her room. So I'm just like, all right, this is a little bit better than the floor.
Right.
But she was really, really quick, and I was afraid of my experience the first time.
Of
so
course.
what I did was ask for the epidural, assuming that would alleviate
Help
any of that that happened the first time. But she lost a lot of oxygen, and they weren't explaining to me why and what was going on. They were just like putting things on my face and not telling me, what was happening.
Right.
So when I started to do my research, now I'm like, of these things, and even like, paying attention to some of her phenomenal girls, very, very smart, but some of the, after effects that possibly came from that birth experience. I'm just like, I wish that I could have advocated better, like, for myself, or had someone there for me that's like, no, that's not right. Why are you giving her this? Can you please explain to us? Just explaining. So that, thinking back to those experiences and some of the things that happened is what got me here with my son.
Yeah.
Nice.
And now you're advocating for other women of color, which is amazing. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm very, when you gain new knowledge, you just want to like scream it, to the world, and I
Hence
don't.
the platform.
Right, exactly. I never want to sound like, I know it all and I have all the answers, but I'm like, I definitely have the experience, like, for sure. I might not have all the answers, but I can tell you from the first to the third, I see the difference.
Yeah.
It's a major difference.
But sometimes experience is like really the best empirical research, right, that you can have when it comes to situations like this, which is why we have built this platform, because we have experts like Jay. We have women of color like yourself who have had experiences. We have, other resources that are available from the nutrition space. So we want to make sure that we're creating these collective conversations so that we as women of color have a space to be seen, to be heard, and to help one another.
Yes.
And I think it's important for us also to see people who are doing this work that look like us.
Yeah.
Because we were talking about it earlier, we often think that the only validation for things to work or for it to be substantial is if it comes from a whitewashed or, a general point of view, right?
But if it's textbook or
But when we're trying to change things, and I wanted to ask you a little bit about like your family's relationship with having these discussions of seeking out your own knowledge, right? Having conversations about like I want a different birth this time around. But talking to your grandma, and I don't know, but I'm just saying, talking to your grandmother or your auntie or your mom about this is new information, I want to use a doula. Did they give you any resistance? Like, how did those conversations actually go?
So I actually was also kind of pushed to look more into support for this birth because my grandmother did pass. She was my
so
support.
sorry.
Thank you. The first 2 times she was in both deliveries and she did as much as she could. So I'm like, wait, I don't have more around this time. Yeah. I need someone. And, you know, I wasn't raised by my mother. I was raised by my father. So that's, again, I didn't have the access to any of that information. You know, there was no one to really, and my grandmother, you know, had her children umpteen years ago. Yeah. So now it wasn't, you know, direct family, but of course extended family and friends. And we were in the middle of the pandemic, so a lot of it was known just by me posting and sharing what I was learning. And there was, especially when it came to the birthing center, I told Latoya, I said, people thought I was crazy. Yeah. They were like, what? You're not going to the hospital? Are you nuts? Like, you know, like, what are you, and you're trying to have a water birth? Like, they thought it was insane. So, the doula part, you know, more people are a little more warmed up to the doula, especially with Erica Badu, you know, being a doula. It's like, oh, that's a cool thing.
Not knowing that doulas are a part of our history, right? And were something that ancestrally from Africa, you know, and we adopted that even here in slavery. Like, a doula was a very important part of the operations of a plantation. They were actually highly revered, right? And really made sure that babies were delivered safely and so on and so forth. So it's not, historically, they have always played a very important role for us.
Yeah. And I think, I don't know how we like strayed away from that information or forgot about that, but it needs to be emphasized a lot more, because like I say, even me, I wasn't sure, like, you know, because I had a grandma, you know, like, what did I need a doula for, you know?
Well, you know what happened was, and there's a documentary, Aftershock. They highlight some of this where the medical system became very whitewashed, right? So instead of it being doulas, you know, there was the whole implementation of white male OBGYNs who were doing experimental thing on slaves. And that's how it morphed into this different medical culture, right? So the doula was kind of phased out. And then now you have these white obstetricians who are now caring for women of color and, you know, people that didn't look like them, right? So, and now we're just seeing it now coming back in society as a normal thing, and as, which was a part of our culture from the forever, right?
Yeah, and there was a huge shift with changing people from going from birthing centers and birthing in their homes to moving them into the hospitals. And they actually did some criminalizations of the midwives. So midwives traditionally are the people who have always birthed people around the world. And you'll see it if you look at all of the statistics from global maternal health. Midwives are usually the ones that are delivering. The OBs are the backup. Right? But there was a huge shift around the 40s and 50s trying to change the perception of midwives almost in alignment with like witchcraft, or like things that were seriously like things that were seen as dark or dirty or not really the way it should be, right? So when they did that criminalization, they shifted the way that midwives were perceived by people, and they actually ended up going into almost like an underground type of thing, right? So you've seen the same thing happen with with the mortality rates, the morbidity rates of the moms and their babies, and the changes to breastfeeding and the way that people went from breast milk to formula. All of it was happening during that same time, right? So to your point, like having your grandmother there who's had her experience with having her children, same thing for me. When I had my kids, having a conversation with my grandmother, I was raised by her myself, talking to her about, you know, I want to have a natural birth. I want to be able to experience it. She's like, girl, that's scary. You don't need to do any of that stuff, right? So it wasn't that she was trying to give information that was bad, but from her perspective, from when she was birthing, right, this is how it was given to her. So it was almost like, don't like to use
It's
this
a
word like
cycle.
trauma porn,
Yeah.
right? But like, but it's giving you a different perception of what birth can actually be. It doesn't have to be a procedure; it can be an experience, right? So again, I'm so excited that you went out and you sought that knowledge, and you didn't stop at the part that was scary or traumatic, right?
It was a lot of pushback from family and friends. The main thing was, what if something happens and you're not at the hospital?
Right.
That was the biggest fear for everyone.
But what they don't know is the hospital is where it usually be happening at. And I'm a nurse. I'm gonna tell you the truth, right? But you needed that, and I think the more we have these conversations and the more we utilize this platform, we'll be able to normalize those conversations of not just relying on hospitals or providers to tell us what kind of experiences we should have, but including us and integrating us into our care. That's what's going to reduce these mortality and morbidity rates, right?
Absolutely.
And what that holistic care model looks like, right? Because you tapped into something about like even breastfeeding and like nutrition, right? So we have Latoya here from It's Nutrinatal. Am I saying that correctly?
So the name of the nonprofit is Collective Food Works.
Okay.
And the name of our program that we're launching is the Nutrinatal program.
Awesome. Awesome. So tell us a little bit about what you do and about your platform.
Absolutely. So my name is Latoya Meadows. I am the owner and founder of Collective Fare, which is a full-service hospitality company. We also have storefront locations in Brooklyn, and I also am the founder of a nonprofit by the name of Collective Food Works. But more importantly is, I'm a mother of two. I have a 20-year-old, gave birth to him in 2000, and I have a 2-year-old, and gave birth to him in June of 2020. So trust me, everything that Danny has been saying, we see these things and we've been through them, and sometimes we have to sit back and think about, if no one's going to save us, how can we save ourselves? Right? And this is how we gave birth to the Nutrinatal program. The Nutrinatal program is a comprehensive program to inject nutrition and wellness into maternal health. The program allows for mothers to be able to get access to healthy, nutritious food, nutritionists. When I was pregnant with my last son, I'm over 40. So they labeled me geriatric obstetrician.
Yeah. Crazy.
So I was like, okay, I'm not that old.
Right.
Mind your business. But while my experiences, and mind you, I was pregnant during the pandemic, and you're talking about not even being, during the lockdown and trying to go to prenatal services. But one thing that stood out to me was how many young women when I was in the clinic, how many young women had gestational diabetes, preeclampsia, and all of these other things. We're talking about 22 and 23-year-olds. So if we're already dealing with systemic problems when it comes to food access and nutrition access, and then you get pregnant, and then you're eating that same type of diet and feeding that into your child, we got to make changes. So how do we do that? Because having those disparities, having those issues while you're pregnant, and then not knowing how to get out of them, or when you go to the nutritionist, they give you a plastic cup and they says, this is how much orange juice you should drink. They show you a glass of milk. This is how much milk you should drink. That's not a practical application to really change the way you eat.
Right.
The problem that we find, we've done several surveys in underserved communities in Eastern Brooklyn. We find that people are just not educated. Nobody walks up to you and say, hey, this is a butternut squash. This is how you should cook it. So my team and we got together and we decided, you know what, we're going to try to fix some of these problems, but we're going to do it through education. We're going to do it through food access. The Nutrinatal program is a food access program that allows moms to be able to get a weekly CSA meal box.
Nice.
During their first trimester. They're also going to have access to nutrition, maternal support, such as doulas, such as other maternal health support groups. And then during their later trimesters, they get meal prep services, because I know myself, had I had that around 6 months, I couldn't stand on my feet. I was getting swollen ankles, and all of that was playing into the fact of how I would eat.
Sure.
That's so dope.
So by having the meal prep services and the weekly CSA, and then also building a supportive community around that, is going to help change the way we look at food. Also, in the later part of the Nutrinatal program, we're also going to have meal prep around lactation support, because you have to, a lot of women think that during pregnancy is the time that we should be eating the most. actually the time we should be eating the most is when we're
Postpartum.
breastfeeding,
Yeah.
because that's when we're putting out that wonderful, delicious, and healthy and nutritious milk for our babies. And we want to sort of bring that back. I've pulled groups of moms when it comes to breastfeeding. They usually go, oh, no, but that's because the booby has been sexualized.
Yep.
And we tend not to think about it in a way of providing nutrition. So let's bring that mindset back.
Sure.
And then also later on in the program, we also going to do baby meal prep. So how do we pass on this knowledge? That's the way we grew up, right? Our grandmothers trained us how to cook, and we passed that on to our families. So by being able to train the moms and showing them this is how you should be meal prepping for your baby, and will help mitigate some of the things that we have to purchase, such as the Similac and that Gerber processed food that is sitting on that shelf for months and years at a time.
Preservatives
And you want to
and
put
all
that,
additives.
So bringing back nutrition and really, really focusing on how do we create whole families and whole health and through a really holistic way.
That's wonderful, because I'll tell you, I got Wick when I had my son. Shout out to Wick. No, no shade to Wick, but it wasn't nutritional at all. I mean, it was systematic food that they gave you. It came in a can, you stirred it up. It was just like very, very processed. So
we're also talking about programs that haven't been updated since the 60s. So, I guaranteed, maybe certain cereals weren't around, but Danny and I were just talking, like I showed her 3 different formulas that I had for my son, like Else, Kabita, which is a goat milk, because my baby was very colicky, so he couldn't have the Enfamil or the Similac, which I wasn't trying to give him anyway. But as a mom, we worry if we're breastfeeding, if we're feeding our children enough.
Sure.
So I wanted to provide some additional nutriment, nutrition for him, but I didn't want to give him the Similac and the Enfamil. So it was even showing Danny the different types of formulas that are out there, but you can't get that on Wick.
Right.
Had she went to the supermarket and got that, they would have said, no, this is not Wick. Or, different type of cereals or different type of vegetables. Wick doesn't really, but that's...
Well, because it's governmental and it's
Exactly.
just placed there as a subsidy.
Right.
So
Correct.
there's something in place.
So if
I'ma
we
give y'all
begin
something.
to, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
If we begin to make the changes within our communities, I guarantee you the health, they want to. They really want to help. So part of the Nutrinatal is we partner with health facilities and medical centers. They want to make changes. They're just not quite sure how to do it. So we become that pass-through. We become that connection point to that bridge, rather, to help create change in our communities and help create change in our maternal systems.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
So you both hit on so many things. I'm writing notes all over the place. But I want to talk a little bit about Wick. So yes, Wick is definitely governmental ran. We all know about government cheese and all that stuff, right? But there is a lot of shift happening specifically around the public policy side of maternal health. And Wick is definitely on the ballot, if you will, right? So when it comes to learning about other formula options, learning about how stomach sensitivities and allergies our children are having, you actually do have the ability to have Wick support those formulas, but it actually involves your medical provider. So having those conversations with your doctor, doing the research, bringing them the information and saying, I need my daughter or my son to be on this type of formula because they have XYZ. This is actually a person that can be a part of changing what Wick can cover for you. So I'm a nurse by trade, but I had a lot of patients who have G tubes and things like that. They will receive Wick, they will receive all these different medications, but sometimes they will have to be on like special types of formulas, right? But the only way that they will be able to obtain those things is through the override from the medical provider. These things, they're not easy, of course, but it's not as tedious as you think. There's also a lot of breastfeeding coalitions that are advocating for it. So in New Jersey, I'm a part of the New Jersey Breastfeeding Coalition, and that's something that we've been talking about for probably the last 2-3 years of how to have more conversations with Wick to incentivize breastfeeding, to also minimize formula use so that moms understand, what they can do or how they can have how they can breastfeed more effectively. And then excuse me, sorry, how they can breastfeed, how they can incentivize it, and connecting them with lactation consultants. So now a lot of WIC offices are employing lactation consultants to be able to be there on site to have these conversations with moms and to make sure that they know what options they have. It's not only, the formula. It's not only just this one little lane, right? So it's helping you make a little more of an informed decision, but it can happen. Yeah.
And people just need to know
shift.
about it,
Yeah.
and how to advocate for themselves.
Yeah.
Like, this is what's available, and how do I get this for my family?
But we all have access to Google, so we can look up these things.
That's right.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's what I was gonna say. The nutrition aspect. Again, my first two experiences is I just went with what I knew, which is why what Latoya is doing and the whole Collective Fair organization is so important, because I didn't know, the other nutritional options out there during pregnancy. But again, in my third, and this took before my son was born, I was actually spent many years very sick, and I couldn't, the doctors, they didn't know what was going on. I couldn't figure out my migraines, my stomach issues. So I ended up changing my diet, and I removed a lot of stuff out of my diet, replaced it with some other clean, plant-based foods, and I stopped getting sick. Like, I can't remember the last time I've been as sick as I used to be. And same with my pregnancy. I decided, this pregnancy, which was very different, I didn't know if it was because I had a boy or I'm older. I'll be 40 this year, but I did have HG, which in the beginning of my pregnancy with my son, I started out with a traditional OB before, because the birthing center, you have to go through a process to be, even at the main thing was my age. They were calling me geriatric also. I really had to make sure I was 100% approved to go to the birthing center. So I started out with a traditional OB, and they were not, taking my sickness very serious. I'm like, this is different from the first two times. I can't even go to work. Like, I can't get out of my bed. Something is wrong. I kept saying, I'm like, I feel like I'm like, deteriorating. Something is wrong. And they weren't taking it serious. So I really dived in more with my nutrition, and people were like on a pushback about that too. And they're like, you're pregnant, you got to eat everything. And I'm just like,
I can't even eat nothing.
Right. I'm like,
water.
I can't eat it all. But I was really paying attention more, and I did my research when it came to my nutrition, and it actually got me through. I had it the whole 9 months, HG. Some people were like, oh, it'll end after the first trimester. No, it did not. It did not. But the way I ate and my nutrition, it got me through. Like, it wasn't as hard as I heard it could have been, but it was more difficult than my first two. And the same with my son. I knew that, once he was born, I knew with my first two children, it's kind of like what Latoya said, like, there was a lot of throwing up on the formula, my breast milk. I didn't have the education around breastfeeding. I was eating God knows what, and my daughters were reacting to it. But all I kept hearing was breastfeed, breastfeed, breastfeed. No one was telling me, the proper way to breastfeed and the nutrition, that goes with the breastfeeding. So with my son, I made the changes, but he was still like reacting to the breast milk, and I knew, I was like, I do not want to put him on formula. And I didn't know about the ones that Toya had mentioned, but I did the deepest research ever, and we actually started making his milk.
Oh, wow.
We made it from hemp. And again, the lack of knowledge, so it was fear, and people were just like, even his pediatrician is like, oh, is he getting vitamin D? And he was getting everything, and to the point that he's on social media and everyone's so shocked about his advanced skills, and I'm like, I think that a lot of kids are this way or can be this way,
because when you feed them properly,
right. They're like, he's walking at 9 months and he's saying words, and I'm just like, he's getting all of his wonderful, nutrients and everything that people were afraid he wasn't getting. But I'm like, I did, and people would ask, they're like, how did you find out? And I'm like, I did some deep research, and I wasn't going to let someone just tell me, this is what you do, this is what you take, this is what you give him. So what Latoya is doing is extremely important.
Listen, moms need support. This is children are not born with blueprints. I wish they were.
right. Especially when they turn 16.
Right, girl. So
I could use a blueprint.
I know. Yes, I know.
Being able to provide a program that allows moms to advocate for themselves and to just give us a lot more education, and so that things aren't. Yes, we can talk to Dr. Google, but just being able to turn to someone like we have in the past and say, hey, you know, I'm having this issue, and I find that a lot of moms don't really have that supportive group. So being able to create something that allows us as women to really collaborate and communicate and create a platform for ourselves, I think it's just gonna be amazing.
Yeah. And go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I just wanted to touch, because I want to make sure that everyone knows the term. So HG is hyperemesis gravidarum. So that's caused by severe, not just, oh, I threw up, I feel nauseous. It's severe nausea, vomiting, huge losses of weight, malnourishment. Unfortunately, I was there, child. It was terrible. It can cause imbalances. It can cause severe weight loss, and it also can impact the pregnancy, right? So again, thank you for sharing that, because I don't think a lot of people talk about these things because it's often brushed under the rug, right? Like, oh, you'll be fine, just drink some tea or drink some ginger ale.
That's what I was told. But
it can really, really be severe. I know for me, when I had my fourth pregnancy, my second daughter, I ended up in the hospital for 3 months, and I was on TPN, which is basically like IV nutrients, because I literally could not eat food. I lost almost 30-something pounds in my pregnancy, right? So, like, people need to understand the severity of it and how HG also relates to a lot of other pregnancy complications, such as preeclampsia, stillbirth, and NICU babies, prematurity. So having knowledge of that and knowing, again, something's not right, trusting your body, trusting yourself, and saying, I'm not going to just take the knowledge that you're saying that you have because you're the expert, but knowing that you're the expert of you, like, that's empowering. You my friend in my head. Just
the birthing center. Once I got to the birthing center, they were so much more supportive with all of that. The sickness, oh my God, it felt like a second home, to be honest.
That's nice. And you went to the birthing center of New Jersey. That's where I saw it featured on the CBS.
Birthing center of New Jersey. I had no clue what a birthing center was. You know, at first I just was doing research about doulas, and that's how I actually came across it. And I'm like, because we were leaning toward the home birth, and I wasn't really excited about that, only because I feel like being somewhere else is like a vacation. You know, like, I want to feel like I'm on vacation and having my baby. So I'm like, I don't want to do home. So I found out about the birthing centers. They only have like one here in the city, and I didn't see too much around, and they were like on a pause. That needs to change. Yeah, so I was like, this is crazy. They're so scarce. And then I saw the one in New Jersey. Again, it's like one or maybe two in New Jersey, and they're like really far apart. So the one closest to me ended up being that one, the birthing center of New Jersey. And I went, and I fell in love, and they were like keeping up with me in email. Even when I was interested, they were making sure I was completely, like I said, cleared to give birth there. Like, they really cared. They wanted to make sure my iron was correct, and, you know, health-wise I was correct, and they supported around the HG and everything, my weight to get back up to where it needed to be before they cleared me. And they were like, you know, my parents. Like, I really knew my midwife, my OB. It was like they knew me by name. It wasn't just like, oh, ma'am, you know, come here, sit down, get this chart, see you the next time. And they were, when I was sick in the beginning, they were seeing me multiple times. And some of my, like, friends and family, they're like, why are you going so much? And they weren't writing me prescriptions and saying, you know, you just take some Tylenol, you'll get better. But they were really like, you know, what are you eating? And, oh, here's our nutritionist, and doing things. It was phenomenal.
That's wonderful.
The prenatal care was wonderful.
See, that's an experience.
Well, I was going to say, and an experience that empowers you, right? Because now you know what it's like not to have had that as experience, right? And identify that in other women's experiences, so you could be like, you know what, that doesn't seem right, or how about trying it, you know? So we know, when we know better, we do better, and that's our job to teach that to other people. So tell us a little bit more, like, what are the next phases for your platform and what you're doing in terms of expanding and so on and so forth?
Absolutely. So Nutrinatals in the beta phase. We're actually looking, we have 10 moms right now so far signed up. We're looking for a total of 50. Nice. So if any moms are in their early pregnancy stages, please go to our link tree at Collective Foodworks and sign up. We're looking to, in the New York City area. So I got to put that there. They call from D.C. Like, we're not there yet, girl. We coming. But yeah, it's, being able to provide because so let me put it like this way. I am like a scientist. I like to do my research first, and I like to also move our programs very informed with what the clients want.
Yeah.
It's very important that we build programs that are sustainable and that actually impact and create change. Is one thing that we can continuously do, and that's support one another and support programs that are making changes in the world.
I love
Very
this.
good. Very good. And what are some next steps for you? Like, where do you plan to take your advocacy to the next level?
Well, I was so excited when Toya told me about this program because she had already, pulled me in to work with Collective Fair and Collective Food Works, and she's like, oh, and we have, a maternal health program. I'm like, what? And so I'm excited to continue to support her with that and the growth of it, and advocate in that way, but also continuing, my own advocacy as much as I can from CBS had came to the birthing center and they ended up choosing me because of my story was so different from the first two. So just being exposed in that way to, share from experience, because we always hear about it, but you never really hear the process, and you never hear someone might have had all of their children naturally, and what can they tell you about what the difference is, from a non-natural birth to a natural one. So being able to just continue that advocacy on my own, partnering up with, companies or radio stations and media platforms to continue the advocacy, and on my social media page, I'm always Facebook, Instagram, even down to the nutrition, again, which is why it's so aligned with Latoya and Collective Fair. I told you with Convo is not just a relationship platform. I'm very serious and dead set on it being wellness for the, the purpose of having healthier relationships.
Sure.
So we're focusing on really clearing up the mental, physical, spiritual wellness so that we can even operate in these relationships. So I do a lot around wellness, and I have even tailored it to teach people, if we eat differently, our moods are different, and then if our mood is different, we could socialize differently.
Which is why it was important for us to launch Maternal at the Mental Wealth Expo that we did with Charlemagne back in October, because we wanted to be in that collective space where we were having these conversations that were very important to our community and communities of color specifically, right? So we had about 3,000 or more people showed up that day on a Saturday.
So many people.
In the middle of Times Square. I'm like, y'all really want to learn and have these conversations. So we had these really great breakout rooms around these maternal conversations where women could come speak. We even had a Dear Black Dad panel where we had men, and typically men don't share, right? But I had to pull the plug on them. They went for an hour because it was very therapeutic, right? And these are conversations that are going to help us, right? And people want an outlet. They want to know that there's help. They want to know that they're not alone, right? And so that is what Maternal is all about. It's all about making sure that mothers of color have a space where they can be heard, have a voice, and make sure that they have access to the resources, information they need to have a healthier outcome in communities of color. So
thank you for this work.
Well, I mean,
so when is the maternal health convo coming?
Right.
You know what? I've actually been asked that a couple of times, especially when people see my video. They're just like, oh, you need to have a because convo is always based on different topics.
Sure.
Again, that connects with relationships, and I always find a way to connect it. So when I think about the maternal aspect of that wellness, the experience I had even with my partner, the connections we were able to make during my prenatal with the doula, she would always, this is how you support her when she's in pain. It was bringing us closer together. And then the birthing process, of course, was just magical for the both of us. And connecting that to relationships, I'm like, that has to be a combo for people. Because if you are having pregnancy, you know how we are when we're pregnant. Sometimes we don't even want to be near them.
Right.
At all, our partners. So
it's an important piece of the puzzle.
Right. So I'm like, if there's ways to make that more comfortable during our pregnancy.
And I think for a lot of men, maybe they don't even understand how they can get involved.
Yeah, they don't know their place.
It would be really great to be able to bring them into the fold, because it is their seed they're carrying.
Right.
So it's important for them to be able to have that connection while the growing process is happening.
I do see a lot of new, or maybe not new, but a lot of fatherhood movements and initiatives actually starting and growing and prospering, especially during the pandemic.
Yeah.
I know for us, that was where we saw this huge growth, right? So can I ask you ladies about how you feel like the pandemic kind of changed or maybe pivoted the work that you all are doing? Did it have any impact on you? Or
Oh yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So during my pregnancy, during the pandemic, like I said, I gave birth in June of 2020, but during that time, I was running an emergency food hub out of Brownsville, Brooklyn, because that was one of the neighborhoods that was, completely, landlocked. You really couldn't get a lot of resources there, so we were bringing in the resources. As far as food, we were producing. My company was producing about 10,000 meals a week.
Wow.
We were moving about 14,000 pounds of produce and putting that out into Eastern and Central Brooklyn. So during that time, I really took that time to really start to talk to the community, because these are areas that were always underserved. They were always dealing with, food access issues. And then myself being pregnant, I was like, so if I'm going through all of this and I have what I'm considering a really good doctor, and there are other women that look just like me, they don't have access to this, what are the things that we can do to make changes?
Right.
So the pandemic really informed the way I even move my business now. I don't even think about putting out a sandwich without thinking about what type of health impact or sustainable impact that it's going to create, like down to the packaging. So because we realized that there were a lot of issues in the world, but we were too busy to really even start to move on them. The pandemic gave us that nice quiet time.
Yes.
It was a hard pause.
Right, really, but it was necessary.
It was.
It was necessary. I always say to people, if you didn't come out of 2020 and 2021 completely changed, you wasted your time.
You sure did.
Yeah, something might be wrong,
Yeah.
right? I'm teasing. But this is wonderful. And what I love about both of your stories and your journeys, it's a tangible result as to what we're trying to do statistically to drive down these unfortunate circumstances when it comes to the experience that women of color are having in when it comes to maternal health care. So I love that this is like a real example of what's happening in that space that's positive and
Well,
a
listen,
positive outcome.
We women of color, we have always been the change makers. We have always been the ones to heal our communities. And it's about time for us to step up and take our place back in this world. We, like you said, we're the doulas, the midwives. We have those. We have those skill sets. It's innately in us. It breaks my heart. I'm connected to 2 other doula organizations through my program, and when I hear the doulas complaining about the different issues they have, well, how not being paid or not having proper education, that's another big section that I think needs to be tackled. And would definitely love to get more support for doulas so that they can support the rest of them, so that they can create support for the moms.
And even finding them, because people have asked me, how did I find my doulas? And I had to really dig. To be honest, I'm like, I can't believe it's this hard to find some in the area. Like, I'm on Google, I'm on hashtag and Instagram, like, NYC doula. So that's what I wanted to point out too. Like, I want us to, which is why I want to continue the advocacy. I want it to become bigger and more upfront than the mainstream advocacy that we see now, because people still, they just need the access and the knowledge.
Well, we have to. If our rights, as far as how we choose to do with our bodies, are being taken away from us, then we need to be supported in another way. We need to be supported to make sure that we are mentally and physically sound as we begin to give birth to these babies.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, and I'm just always big on the preservation of Black families.
Yes.
It's rare, right?
It shouldn't be.
It shouldn't be.
It used to not be.
It used to not be, right? But it's a rarity in 2023. So what I'm hoping for, and my prayer is for our community, is that we get back to, that foundation of family that is a big part of our culture. And that is what this platform is about, making sure that mothers of color get what they need so that we can build strong families and stronger things generationally for ourselves. But speaking of finding, where can everybody find y'all?
Oh, you can find me on Instagram at Dani, DANI _BEAUX _ and Convo. That's where I put everything life and relationships wellness, CONVEAUX, and www.moreconvo.com.
So you can find me on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook at Collective Fare, FARE, Fare like food, or you can follow us at Collective Food Works. We're on all the platforms, and we also have Linktree accounts with the same names.
Awesome.
Nice.
Well, thank you for coming up here to the Maternal platform today. It was a pleasure having you both.
Thank you for
We hope you'll come back and update us on everything that you're doing to help create positive change in the Black maternal health space. I'm Kenya Gibson. I'm here with my co-host.
I'm Jay Wilson.
Yes, and
Finally said it.
stay tuned for another episode of Maternal.
Yes.
Thank you.
Until next time.
You ladies